wondering whether in Nepal there may not be some, some Rinpoche?
Nepal is a dangerous country. Insofar as in Nepal, people get confused by the mixture of different traditions. I don't say that there may not be in Nepal some very genuine lamas, especially in the interior, but you don't find them in Kathmandu.
What would you recommend to the young people in America in terms of a practice and a method of attaining enlightenment?
Well, I think we have to first to start on a simpler level. That means let us not already think of enlightenment. Let us first of all think of our peace of mind, peace of heart, of our loving attitude towards others. It means to all these simple foundations, you know. Enlightenment, if people start with the idea of enlightenment, I'm afraid they, not that they aim too high, but they should first make the first steps before they aim at the very summit. Certainly the idea and the ideal of enlightenment should be at the back of their mind. I don't say no. But people who set out to achieve something, you know, that very idea of achievement, which is in America very strong, that is a strengthening of ego. And we should rather be receptive, like a vessel that receives the divine power of the universe, which is also within us, you see. Then the next steps will follow automatically, because once you get into the trend, into the direction, you will have more and more. You will automatically go from stage to stage, isn't it? You will be drawn by the beauty of the aim. You will be drawn by your own inspiration, and then you will get, without knowing it, higher and higher, or deeper and deeper, as you may call it.
I can't find the start of me without seeing the start of you. And I know things have to change, but I find it strange, and I know you do. And I've been going in circles all of these nights, trying to find a way back home. I started picking up pieces, hoping they make a picture that I know. And our time has come, and we keep it going on and on. Yeah, we count the clocks ticking just to slow the time. And we grow, and the seasons know there's a quiet that shows in the space between. And our fire, no longer bright, is out of sight, and we both know. And I've been going in circles all of these nights, trying to find a way back home. I started picking up pieces, hoping they make a picture that I know. Our time has come, and we keep it going on and on. Yeah, we count the clocks ticking just to slow the time.
Lama Anagarika Govinda, the author of these books like Foundations of Tibetan Mysticism, the The Way of the White Clouds, which was my inspiration for my own journey to the East back in 1967, it became obvious that I felt I needed to go the way of the white clouds and needed to I was in a very public relationship with a very beautiful girl, who was a famous star, and I was in a band, and there was a major tour coming up, but it suddenly appeared that wouldn't work as an outcome, and that somehow one had to drift the way of the white clouds, and that book had been a great inspiration towards that. And so oddly enough, in a moment of distress, of existential distress, I contacted a spiritual master at the foothill of the Kashmiri Himalayas in the Punjab region, and he wrote back and said, come and see me immediately, which is when I took off overland after many adventures. I reached India and was there and benefited from this wonderful invitation, which didn't involve any financial costs or anything like that. At the library of this rather wonderful place was a pilgrim's guide. This pilgrim's guide was not for foreigners, it was for Indian pilgrims. It happened to have had an Hindi and English version. So my inspiration about the Way of the White Clouds was, yes, I want to make a pilgrimage to Mount Kailash in Tibet. The difficulty was that it was in the middle of the Chinese Cultural Revolution. Tibet had been invaded and was the greatest abuses were going on, and it was quite impossible by ordinary means to get there. You could obviously. So I thought, well, the inspiration was, I read in the Pilgrim's Guide that this Swami is leading caravans of sadhus and anachorites, etc., to Kailash on foot, all the way from the foothills of the Himalayas, in a place called, the caravans started in a place called Nainital. So on my way to Nainital, to meet this said Swami, I ran into this marvelous South African traveler who is now one of the heads of the Buddhist Society in England, and an extraordinary fellow who is still my friend to this day. And we met casually, as one did in those days, and we exchanged, I'm on my way to Nainital. He said, Nainital, do you know that Almora, which is another place across, quite as the crow flies, not far, but in the Himalayas, entire day travel away. That's where Lama Govinda lives. Lama Govinda, the inspiration by the author of the book, of the books that I'd read and so on. Oh, great. But I went to meet my Swami in Nainital. When I got there, somebody came up to me and said, "Who are you looking for?" So I said, I came to see the Swami, and okay, come with me. And we walked in more or less silence for a couple of miles. This man took me to his house. His very beautiful daughters served a wonderful meal. At the end of the meal, this man broke the news to me. He said, "Unfortunately, the Swami you've come to see has just died." So, you know, all my plans, which was I'm going to abandon my Western look by having this, there was this dye you could put on your skin, and in order to overcome the rest of things, the language and all that kind of thing, which would reveal to anybody that I wasn't a Hindu Swami, was to be a deaf mute. So that was decreed a very good plan, and one would have to abandon in Nainital, you know, all of one's documents, all of one's money, and basically have the bare minimum and go on that what might be going to one's death, because it was a very dangerous pilgrimage, full of perils. But I was determined to do this. Therefore, in the initial announcement that the man who organized the whole thing had died, I was slightly crestfallen, but my second thought was, oh, I should turn my steps towards Nainital. And that's what I did. So I went there. It took a long time, many hours of traveling, and a whole day of traveling. And then there was many miles of walk, Himalayan walks up into the Himalayan footridge. At the end of this ridge was this place called Karsar Devi Ashram, and there was Lama Govinda. But there was a sign saying no visitors until sundown. So, having come so far, I repaired to a small temple on a hillock, which was absolutely, completely deserted. There was no one there. On the ceiling of which was the Sri Yantra that's behind you when you do the sessions. And so, preparing for this meeting, waiting the time that had to be, was on one's back, facing the ceiling in this temple, and then walking there at the appointed hour when the sun was setting. Lama Govinda opened the door, and I introduced myself, and he swiveled on his feet in this wonderful movement. And behind him in the bookcase, almost without looking, he reached for a book which he flipped open, and it was Letters of Rainer Maria Rilke. And this one letter from from Rainer Maria Rilke to André Gide, the famous French writer, was about my grandfather, about my father and my uncle, who were still young teenagers, and an introductions, a note about the family. And so Lama Govinda looks at says, the Rola, right? And I was astounded. Come in. And so that was how this, you know, extremely bizarre dimension opens up. Well, here I am in this wonderful Karsar Devi Ashram, which was given to him by Evan Swens, you know, who wrote all those books about, and the Tibetan Book of the Dead, all the translations with of these important texts. And we're sitting there, and a very odd man arrives in an extraordinary turban with kind of this color of a very dark purple robe, kind of violet turban. And he was an Indian, but of European ancestry, who was a natural-born mystic, and he was Sunyabhai, the Lord of Silence, of whom Miguel Serrano writes in his books, and it was just and my enchanted meeting with Lama Govinda was, oh, now where can I stay? You know, there are no hotels in anywhere except back down at the bazaar, which is many Himalayan miles away on foot, no transport of any kind. So as I was pondering the problem of where to stay, this man, Sunyabhai, pipes up and he says, "You're far too grand for, otherwise I would give you hospitality." And I said, "Are you kidding? I'd sleep anywhere under an awning. I've got my own bedding," etc. Be that as it may, he was he had a wry smile. He takes me to this marvelous place that he'd built with his own hands, and not a hut, a proper stone house. It was absolutely beautiful. It even had in this beautiful garden and this little stone house, and he said, "This is yours for as long as you want." So I said, "Oh, it was incredible." So I became, with all that, I became therefore Lama Govinda's student in Tibetology. During that time, in Afghanistan, I had, during my travels on the way to India, in Afghanistan I met two Americans in the middle of the desert who were dressed as Afghani warriors, you know. They were two Californian guys who turned out to be the most famous drug smugglers who later on J. Gordon Liddy had busted them, and they belonged to an outfit called the Eternal Love Brotherhood. And those two leaders of the Eternal Love Brotherhood, here we are sitting in the middle of the Afghan desert in Kandahar, and we had a very incredible meeting of hearts and minds and souls, what have you. And they were going west. They were doing whatever they were doing, and I was going further east, obviously, as I was going to India. And they gave me all these drugs, including some Owsley acid and a drug called an experimental psychedelic called STP. So a long time elapses. I'm in Sunyabhai's wonderful house, going every day to spend time with Lama Govinda, who's instructing me, his wonderful Parsi wife, who looks like a silent movie star, is Lee Gotami, his wife, is there. And one day, this guy who had told me, who was still my friend Bruce Ginsberg, arrived, and he stayed in the guest house of that little house where I was. And Bruce came and joined me and with Lama Govinda, etc. And one night, I pulled out this famous STP, and he said, well, let's try it. And now STP was rumored to be a 3-day trip. 3 days, not a few hours, 3 days. So it was so bizarre because we spent a night with this elevator going higher and higher, but it was going very slowly. So you never knew where the top was. So it wasn't, you know, it was a very gentle rise, but you were ever higher. And suddenly, just judging by the light and everything, was the time to go over to Lama Govinda. Well, Bruce didn't come. I went on my own. And as I walked there, I was getting higher and higher, you see. And when I got there, Lee Gottamy said, oh, Stash, help me to get this garden furniture, you know, move this stuff. And she was so comical looking, you know, and I'm getting higher and higher, that I started giggling and giggling hysterically. And she looked at me and she goes, Stash, you're on a trip. And I nearly died with laughter. And she was so funny about it. She said, well, let's tell Lama about this. And Lama Govinda, no judgment, nothing. He said, oh, Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert gave me all these books about all these, what did you take? STP, let me look it up and all that. And he had all this literature, you know, published at the time about these things. He looks it all up, says, right. And that's when he pulled out, he said, we're going to take advantage of this state. And he pulled out those huge photographs taken in Saparang, which was the capital of the kingdom of Guje in western Tibet. It's an extraordinary place. I mean, when you look it up on the internet, there are documentaries about it, but in those days it was so remote and so difficult to get to. And Lama Govinda had been there, and they didn't have equipment that you could photograph those frescoes, very, very early Buddhist frescoes. And they had traced them. They'd done tracings of them that apparently to this day are to be found at a museum in Bombay. So yeah, there were also these photographs of the place, but taken from the outside. And with this condition, he guided a form of meditation whereby one could look at the photograph, which became three-dimensional, and one could enter inside the photograph and make, you know, turn left and look here and look there. And it was amazing. It was like being in this, what we're doing now with sort of this virtual reality thing, but you could turn here and go there, all in inwardly. And it was an amazing way. That is how eventually there was this initiation into this dome that was half buried, where you're in a chamber in the absolute darkness with instructions, where one's meditation is a visualization method whereby you sit in absolute darkness, and suddenly through this practice, a sky blue light appears, but it's there's no source to it. It replaces the darkness, and it is deep, deep blue. It's the darkest blue you can in the sky you could imagine, and it's all pervading. So once you've achieved this first baby step in visualization, one can visualize a form. So one starts with a yellow square, flat yellow square on this background, you know, as if it was a projection. And then one graduates to various geometrical form in a given order with given colors. It's quite it's a very technical and you can't imagine things and say, well, I'm tripping out and I'm seeing this. Yeah, no, it's not like that. It's very much visualization of a precise thing, which leads, this yellow circle contains a red triangle. It is now turning into, you know, you eventually have a cube and a circle and a sphere, etc. It goes on like this until one masters all the different primary colors and their in diverse orders, and one learns how to, and then after that one can start on far more complicated things, which is a kind of what you would today call artificial intelligence with a kind of interface, but it's within a very given structure. So you're visualizing things in a given order with acquisitions coming further and further. Those are the principles of magic. During the thing that we were talking about, at the end of that visit, I was still getting higher and higher, and it was like this odd feeling, a bit like Alice in Wonderland, or Through the Looking Glass, or what have you, where the scale of people and things kept changing abruptly and without any order, and so suddenly people were only this tall or immense, and oneself was immense, or, you know. And as I prepared to take my leave, this is what this important thing, this important revelation, he said, be careful on the outside. And I said, what is the outside? And that immortal phrase, he said, the outside is the inside veiled in mystery. And that was like this utter revelation about the nature of so-called reality. And then a very curious experience which cannot be described as coming from any sense of self, but some place, the sense of suddenly inhabiting another body, of a sort of a South African tribesman, some huge muscular guy who was completely drunk, because I still going higher and higher, and this African, whatever perceiver that remained that could record this, as it were. I can't say I was recording it, but somehow in the memory banks this is recorded, that there was the consciousness that this body of this African was drunk on some sort of bootleg white alcohol, and that it would be better if no other human being crossed its path, because this entity that one was suddenly inhabiting would kill at the drop of a hat anybody who came into its way. And it was rather alarming, you know, and there was the drums of the evening puja, which sounded like African drums, and the rhythm of the blood coursing in this drunken sort of African body was an extraordinarily elating feeling, but there was a sense of menace and danger and this vague sense, well, there's a tank here, a human tank in this form that is moving forward, and it is any kind of contradiction will result in the death of anybody standing in its way, because, you know, there was this sense of this bottle which would be smashed on the skull of any human who would appear. And of course it receded in the course of this long walk back to the house. But it's a very unusual thing, because apparently it's quite unusual to inhabit a completely different body and a different consciousness, and to be there as a sort of visitor in this strange displaced dimension. Because it was no longer India, it was this African place with this mass, this sense of which merged with the high. But this was a kind of odd low. Those were some of the mysteries, but that training with Lama Govinda, later on I was able to go to Nepal and be with the assistant of the Chini Lama at Bodhnath Stupa to do have all these activities, to go to different monasteries where they had different things to study and so on. And it led in a way to this exotic development of these Asian techniques, led to a revitalization of. Without it, I wouldn't have been able to return to a Western alchemical tradition. When I returned, it came very naturally as an offshoot of this experience that it would be valuable to contribute something. I mean, not in any kind of grandiose sense, but something that one wanted to, a specific thing that one wanted to do. And that's what led to these other things we talked about.
I promise that I'll run away with you. I'll run away.